Okay, and now we're going to have a discussion of the 11 ballot measures remaining that the club has not yet taken a position on. And we're going to start local with Measure SM. And here to help me oversee this part of the process of the ballot measures is the club's programs vice president, Janine Bush. And Janine, why don't you introduce our speakers for this segment?
First of all, thank you, John. And first of all, I wanted to thank a big thank you to all of the ballot measure speakers that came to our club tonight, both on the yes and the no positions. I enjoyed meeting all of you by email, and thank you for the returning guests to our club. And I also wanted to mention that on some of the ballot measures, I was unable to get a speaker for a position. So it'll either be myself, Amy, or Sarah from the Legislative Committee who will be describing the position on the other ballot measures. Okay, and so, the first ballot measure is, as John mentioned, is SM, and I'm going to introduce Kevin McCowan, our mayor of Santa Monica.
Well, thank you, and welcome to the issues part of the evening, Santa Monica Democrats. I don't have to tell you, 2020 has been a difficult year, and budget cuts have left us with lots of challenges. Your vote for local revenue through Measure SM is part of the solution. We have a legacy in town of coming together to solve our problems, and we're rising right now to several threats: COVID-19, economic impacts, and just the overall stress that people are feeling. So we've put Measure SM on the ballot as a vital part of rebuilding our community strength. And it raises taxes, but it raises taxes only on corporations and those who sell properties worth $5 million or more. So renters, people living with homelessness, families struggling with uncertain employment, our homebound senior citizens, and those who struggle with mental health issues will all benefit from the revenue generated from Measure SM. It'll protect Santa Monica, especially public health and vital public services. Among the things we'll use this money for: maintaining clean beaches and parks, protecting 911 services, funding our economic recovery efforts, restoring our libraries, continuing the programs and services that we've already shown will reduce homelessness, supporting our rental assistance programs for local seniors, funding Meals on Wheels, restoring after-school programs, mental health programs. All these things are paid for from the general fund, which is where this money goes. Every single penny raised by Measure SM will be spent here in Santa Monica. It can't be taken by the state of California or the county. Measure SM applies only to real estate property sales of $5 million or more. It leverages our high property values to help protect public health and the essential public services for all of us that have made those properties worth so much. So we'll get through this together. Please join us in voting yes on Measure SM for a strong Santa Monica.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, and to present the no position, Tika O'Neill, a real estate broker from Malloy Real Estate Services.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak on Measure SM. I'm a resident, property owner, and business owner, and I'm here also representing the Greater Los Angeles Realtor Association on this issue. Now is not the time for a tax increase of any kind, but especially this tax that harms small businesses. COVID-19 and civil unrest have impacted our community, forcing many small businesses to close, which has a particularly negative impact on those who own property because of the domino effect of businesses not being able to pay their expenses. This tax comes at the worst possible time when many of our small businesses are struggling, having much of their income deferred through the various moratoriums and closures, while they still must pay for rising expenses to maintain their property ownership. Santa Monica already has the second highest real estate transfer tax, and this would make it 10 times higher than the county's average, a significant increase. This transfer tax will contribute to worsening our acute local housing crisis. Any additional costs at the time of the transfer of property contributes to increasing the cost of buying or selling properties. Although it is labeled as a tax that would affect luxury housing or for corporations, this tax will be applied to any and all properties above the $5 million sales price. It has the potential to have small and independent property owners and senior citizens who wish to sell their nest egg property a reduced net from any sale, detrimentally affecting their need for retirement or healthcare funds. There has been no accountability on how the tax dollars raised by this tax will actually be spent, because as a general tax, the city cannot designate how the revenue will be spent. It must go into the general fund with no guarantee on what it will be spent on, with zero accountability. Nobody can deny that this will increase the cost of Santa Monica real estate, and it will harm the already fragile economy of Santa Monica by making it more expensive to buy and sell real estate. We urge you to take a no position on Measure SM. Thank you.
Kevin, it's time for your rebuttal.
Well, raise your hand if you don't own a $5 million property. Congratulations, you won't pay this tax. Measure SM is pretty straightforward. It's specifically limited to individual property sales of $5 million or more. It won't impact property sales under that amount. And it protects seniors and renters, by the way, but discourages the kinds of quick flip property speculation that often leads to evictions. So please, we need this money to make this a better city. Vote yes on Measure SM.
Tika?
This proposed tax is a bad idea, particularly at this time. It will truly harm our already fragile economy that can be fueled by the sales in real estate. No one can deny that it will increase the cost of Santa Monica real estate even more. And nobody can deny that it will then make our transfer tax one of the highest in the county. It's also very important to remember that there's truly no accountability for the use of the funds by the city once the tax would be enforced and money's collected. Enough is enough when it comes to new taxes. Please vote no on Measure SM. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both very much. And now let's move on to the next ballot measure. Janine, do you want to set it up? You're muted still. And by the way, just to make sure everybody should at this point have received their ballot. I see that about 50 people have voted so far. So just make sure everybody knows that the ballots are out, and you can message me in the chat if for some reason you didn't get it, and I'll take care of you. Janine, you want to set up the next one?
Sure. Our next ballot measure is an LA County measure, the Reimagine LA measure. And I would like to introduce Eunice Hernandez, the co-director of La Defensa.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Eunice Hernandez. Hi, John. So excited to be here with you all. Thank you for your time. And I mean, it's a long day for a lot of people. So just thank you for being here and let me join the space with you all. Measure J is a LA County measure on the November ballot, and it would do a few things. The biggest thing it would do is that it would move 10% of dollars that are located in a fund where our locally generated tax dollars in the county go to. So when you pay your property taxes, when you buy something, these are locally generated tax dollars that go into a fund. In LA County, right now, the size of that fund is $8 billion. So Measure J would move 10% of those resources into two buckets. One bucket is community reinvestment. That looks like small business support, jobs for youth, housing vouchers, and funds to actually build up capital projects to build up housing. The second bucket it would go to is alternatives to incarceration. In LA County, we have the largest jail population in the entire country, with an average before COVID-19 at 17,000 every single day. Post-COVID-19, we are now at 13,000 people. Most of those people, about 44%, are there pre-trial, meaning that they're just there because they can't pay to get out. So Measure J would invest in community-based resources around community-based pre-trial resources. It would invest in jobs and other supportive access points for people coming back into our communities. There's some caveats to this though. None of the money can go to or go through the traditional injustice system. So that means the sheriffs cannot get access to this 10%, the courts cannot get access to this 10%, but it's really meant to go directly to community-based organizations and the health departments and other departments that actually expand employment and jobs.
Okay.
There's another caveat that says that there must be an inclusive an inclusive and transparent implementation process. So once Measure J passes, community advocates, labor, community members can be a part of how to decide how those resources are distributed. Some of the questions that we get is, you know, the county, like other jurisdictions have already done this and moved money, but how do we know that, what's the plan? Like, is it just gonna sit in the county? Well, I can tell you that for a lot of the organizations that are part of this coalition, we've been working for over a decade in trying to advance and fund the things that we know are going to make our communities thrive, such as housing, alternatives to incarceration. For over a year, we've worked on developing a report called the Care First Jails Last Report with the county that has over 115 recommendations on how we can keep our folks out of the jails, out of the emergency rooms, and out of the hands of law enforcement. So when we talk about funding ATI or alternatives to incarceration, we have a plan for that. And for the community reinvestment piece, that is being led by folks who are helping folks reduce the houseless population, get folks housed and jobs. And so there's also a plan that we're working within our coalition to develop an implementation plan for those resources. This is not a new tax. This is 10%, which is not the floor. I mean, it's not the ceiling, and it has to reach the 10% within 3 years. So right now there's a lot of fiscal uncertainty with what's happening. We know that we're not going to get the 10% straight off the bat, but we have an opportunity to build up to that 10% in the next 3 years. And I'm open to asking any questions. I just don't want to take up more time.
Thank you, Eunice, for that very detailed description. And I was unable to find a compelling argument against Measure J.
There you go. You know, if anyone wants to talk to Sheriff Villanueva, he may be able to give you a reason as to why he opposes it. Okay, so with that said, we appreciate for the local measures, and now we're going to move on to the statewide ballot measures. And I've heard from a couple people in the chat about issues. As far as I know, it's all been resolved. So again, if anyone has any issues, about 11 minutes to go, send me a message. And now let's move on to the statewide ballot measures.
Okay, the first one we will talk about is Prop 14, which is about stem cell funding for stem cell research. And I would like to introduce Evan Swegvetter from the campaign, a campaign rep for California for Cures.
Thank you, Janine. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Evan. I'm here to talk to you and seek your endorsement for Proposition 14, which will advance research and treatment development for more than 75 chronic and life-threatening diseases and conditions, including cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and heart disease. We're proud to have already been supported by the endorsement of the county and state Democratic parties, Governor Newsom, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and we hope to earn your endorsement as well. The measure will continue work that began when 60% of California voters passed Proposition 71 in 2004, which established the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, or CIRM, which funds promising research and medical discoveries at universities and institutions throughout the state, including UCLA, USC, City of Hope, Cedars-Sinai, and Children's Hospital Los Angeles. Since that time, the state has made more progress than was originally thought possible. To put the achievements into context, on average, it takes between 12 to 15 years to bring basic research through clinical trials. The average CIRM grant is less than 7 years old. However, the funding has already led to more than 90 clinical trials, providing hope to more than 4,000 patients, nearly 3,000 peer-reviewed published medical discoveries, and 2 FDA-approved cancer treatments, with many more in the pipeline. While some clinical trials are still in the early stages, the results to date have been remarkable. Cancer patients who had exhausted all other options are now in remission. Paralysis patients have regained upper body mobility and function. Patients with type 1 diabetes are producing their own insulin. Multiple promising clinical trials are still underway for leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, ovarian cancer, and more. Completion of these trials is essential to be able to advance these therapies out into the public for general use. But if we don't pass Proposition 14, this vital research will discontinue this winter, likely, and the potential cures that are at our fingertips will be delayed for years or decades. The reality is California is the only state with the infrastructure and intellectual capital to advance these trials and these medical discoveries through widely available FDA-approved treatments. There's no other entity, public or private, that will take it from here. Many of us will know a family member, a friend, or a loved one dealing with a chronic disease or a condition that could benefit from this research. And for those millions of Californians, this might be their last hope. Advancing this medical progress to fight devastating and life-threatening diseases and conditions, it's an urgent matter, and it cannot be put on hold. Please join me in supporting Proposition 14.
Okay, thank you. And now I will introduce the no side with Marcy Darnowski, the Executive Director for the Center for Genetics.
Thanks so much. I'm with the Center for Genetics and Society. We're a nonprofit organization based in Berkeley, California. And our mission is to bring a human rights and social justice perspective to the human biotechnologies. We support all forms of stem cell research, but believe that Proposition 14 is deeply flawed. The first reason is funding. California, as we all know, faces a serious budget crisis, and this is not the time to add a lot more debt. We're already paying back $327 million a year on the $3 billion in bonds that were authorized back in 2004. And Prop 14 would add another $260 million a year to that. And those repayments would have to be made before funds that are needed for state programs, education, healthcare, housing, fighting wildfires, fighting a pandemic. And the truth is, the second reason, this money isn't really needed right now for stem cell research. When CIRM was created back in 2004, it was because the Bush administration had seriously restricted funding to create new embryonic stem cell lines. But President Obama lifted that restriction, and stem cell research is now well funded by the federal government. This year, it spent $2.1 billion, and the private sector is spending about $10 billion a year. Now, CIRM has funded some good research, but it hasn't remotely delivered on the promises it made to California voters. In 2004, the campaign promised the state would get hundreds of millions of dollars in royalties, and the actual amount has been a pittance of that, a couple $100,000. And as a CIRM board member who opposes Prop 14 explains, there actually isn't a single FDA-approved product for which CIRM's funding has played an important role. The proponents cite 2 products, but while CIRM funded a researcher who worked on them, it has no financial interest in them. And lastly, Prop 14 could have addressed the serious governance issues for which the agency has been widely and repeatedly criticized, but it didn't, and if anything, it makes them worse. There are serious conflicts of interest built into the board, with the majority on the board representing institutions that receive most of the funding from CIRM. And although this is an agency entirely funded by public funds, elected officials have no power to alter anything about it or to oversee it. That's also built in. So these are some of the flaws in the governance issues, and the money just isn't needed to keep advancing in medical research.
Thank you. Evan, time for the rebuttal.
I'll respond to a couple of those points. Regarding federal funding as an alternative, as we've seen, federal funding can be very finicky and not a reliable source to continue this kind of research. Just within the past couple of weeks, 90 Republican legislators sent a letter to President Trump requesting that, among other things, he no longer fund stem cell research. So it's not viable to trust that they can take it from here. There's also a cost associated with not doing anything. If we don't continue this funding, one thing we know will be true: there will be a continued and growing cost to chronic disease. Currently, the state of California spends about 30% of its budget on healthcare, and that figure is not sustainable either and will only continue to grow. It's also important to note that there will be no repayment against the bond for the coming 5 years, allowing us to focus on those priorities that Marcy mentioned and give some more time to recover from the current economic period. Regarding conflicts, there are strict controls in place regarding conflicts of interest. Any board member that could potentially be eligible for a grant is not allowed to vote on any grants.
Thank you.
There's no potential for conflicts in that sense.
Thank you, Evan. Marcy?
Okay, so yes, under President Trump, there have been repeated attempts to cut funding at the NIH, but they've been unsuccessful. There's strong bipartisan support for biomedical research, including stem cell research. I don't think that's a concern. And the private sector is funding stem cell research at $10 billion a year, as I said. I think that the research, that's good research, will go on. The California legislature may want to actually continue to fund some research, but it should do so as an actual state activity. The agency should be run by, like any other state agency. It shouldn't be this independent entity that is under no obligation to or doesn't answer to anybody else. And the conflicts of interest, it's not just me saying that. The Institute of Medicine Review of CIRM complained about conflicts of interest. The Little Hoover Commission complained about conflicts of interest. It's not a small problem.
Thank you. Time.
Okay, stop there. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's obviously the last call now for voting. Try to get those last ballots in, and let's go to the next ballot measure.
The next ballot measure is Prop 17, and that's on parolee voting. And Sarah from our legislative committee will give the yes position on Prop 17.
Thanks, Janine. Hi, everyone. Proposition 17 will amend the California Constitution and allow people who are on parole for felony convictions to vote. California currently prohibits people on parole for the conviction of a felony from voting until their parole is complete, even though they've already completed their prison terms. Currently, nearly 50,000 Californians on parole are barred from voting. And what's worse to me is that many eligible voters, so they're eligible to vote, but they're on probation. Many people confuse probation with parole. And so many of these people also don't vote because they think they're ineligible, even though they're not. Little background: following the Civil War, California refused to ratify the 15th Amendment, which prohibited voting restrictions based on race. And instead, they created a new tool to suppress the political power of marginalized communities. They disenfranchised people convicted of felonies and enshrined it right in the state constitution. Eventually, California voters gave the formerly incarcerated the right to vote, but only after their parole was completed. Right now, the criminal justice system and voter suppression continue to disproportionately impact Black and Latinx communities. The continued denial of parolees' participation in the voting system is antithetical to upholding a strong democracy that is fair and inclusive. If passed, Proposition 17 will amend the state constitution and restore voting rights for people who are on parole, making California the 18th state to do so. People who are currently incarcerated will still be excluded from voting. Voting yes on Proposition 17 will reinstitute the right to vote for people on parole. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to present the no position on Prop 17 from the Election Integrity Project of California. Prop 17 seeks to restore voting rights, the most fundamental and valuable of American privilege, to those who have not completed making full restitution for their crimes. While on parole, a former criminal's liberties, such as movement, association, activities, and even membership of certain items, are still heavily restricted and regularly monitored by the system. Any misstep results in immediate reincarceration. In other words, an individual on parole has not regained the full trust of society at large, nor the privilege to participate as a full member of that society. And we will have no rebuttals, as we were stated, the positions on these ballot measures. And the next ballot measure is the measure for 17-year-olds to have the right to vote. And I would like to introduce Antonella Borges to present the yes position. Antonella is a student at Samo High, and you may have heard of her for her fabulous organization of a March for Our Lives rally several years ago. And she's also a current member of Santa Monica Dem Club's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Antonella?
Hi. So as you heard, my name is Antonella Borges. I recommend you vote yes on Prop 18. 17-year-olds that will turn 18 by a general election should be allowed to vote in primary and special elections because they should get to choose who they want to vote for in a general election. Currently, they're voting between two candidates and they didn't have the option of choosing who they wanted to represent their political party. Yet they have to vote for two people that might not completely align with their views. And if a person wants to vote for the general election, they should be allowed the whole process of voting and an election instead of just being allowed half of the experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella. And I'm going to read another statement from the Election Integrity Project on the no position on Prop 17. 17-year-olds are legal minors. Under that definition, they are still considered children. They are almost all still living at home under the strong influence of their parents. They're not conducive to independent thought and voting without undue pressure from their immediate superiors. 17-year-olds will almost always still be in high school and under the strong influence of their teachers. This again makes it less likely that they would be expressing their own independently thought out choices where they were be allowed to vote. And so there'll be no rebuttal as I was reading the statement. And our next proposition is Proposition 19. And I would like to introduce Tony Vasquez, the chairman of the State Board of Equalization. Tony?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Prop 19 will generate new funding for fire protection and local governments, limits property tax increases for wildfire victims, vulnerable populations, and families. Specifically, Prop 19 will do the following: support life-saving fire and emergency responses, secure needed revenue for fire protection, fire districts, and CAL FIRE in support of California's wildfire response, provide dedicated funding for fire response across the state, including historically underfunded fire districts and rural and urban communities, protecting millions of homes and lives. And then would generate hundreds of millions of annual funding for fire protection and local government, generate new revenue for fire protection and local government emergency services and vital programs, including healthcare access, affordable housing projects, homelessness, and mental health services. Help balance budgets and provide a boost to our state's economic recovery from COVID-19, this pandemic, with revenue protections growing to over $2 billion annually. It will limit property tax increases for seniors, people with disabilities, and families with wildfire that have been victims of wildfire victims. It would also provide relief for seniors, people with severe disabilities, and victims of wildfire transfer when they transfer their homes, properties, tax base to replacement anywhere in California. Constitutionally protected the right for parents and grandparents to pass the family home to their children and grandchildren so they can afford to live in the home they were intended to by Prop 58. Open up housing inventory throughout California for renters and first-time homeowners. It would also close some of the loopholes and tax breaks that are used by vacation houses and second homes and beachfront properties that people will over to their kids. They'll be taxed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And to present the no position on Prop 19, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Ralston, who's had several positions within the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me this evening. I'm going to say right at the beginning that the leading opponent of Proposition 19 is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, but the League of Women Voters of California also opposes it for entirely different reasons. Currently, homeowners over age 55 and the disabled can, on a one-time basis, buy a replacement home of lesser market value than their current home and keep their current assessment, meaning that their property taxes don't increase. Proposition 19 would expand this so that the same people would get a property tax break even when they bought a more expensive home. You know, California is in the midst of a housing crisis. The last people we need to give tax breaks to are people who already own a home and can afford a more expensive one. Under current law, children who inherit property from their parents can inherit the assessments on that property. Prop 19 would limit that tax break so that it applies only to farms and the property that becomes the primary residence of a child. This measure started out as an initiative from the California Association of Realtors, which believes that its passage would increase home sales. Increased home sales would increase the revenue through commissions of real estate agents who would presumably then end up paying higher income tax. So the measure has a provision that if it passes, the State Director of Finance is charged with computing out the net impact of revenue increases and cost savings on the state government. It's difficult to figure out how he will possibly do this, except by some kind of educated guess. Any net increase would then be earmarked primarily for firefighting operations. And while that is amazing selling point right now,
Thank you.
It really eliminates the state's flexibility to respond to other crises in the future.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Tony, time for your rebuttal.
Yeah, my only question, well, I agree, on actually the transfer of property, that it would be taxed, but you would get an exemption if it's your primary residence. As she mentioned, I think she's right, she's correct. And I think the ones that would get taxed is if it's your second home, a vacation home, or if you're, for example, what's happens now is somebody that invested in property who doesn't even live in California gets a benefit.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
I have to say that this started out as an initiative from the realtors. It went through the legislature then, and this provision about the funds going for firefighting, that went through with no estimates at all of how much money this would raise. And it's going to be an incredibly complex task to try to compute how much things have changed based on if this measure passed. How do you decide whether someone would have bought whether a sale of a house happened because this passed or not? Now, even now, the Legislative Analyst's Office has estimated only $10 million for that would go into this fund. Mr. Vasquez has said hundreds of millions of dollars. So take your pick. But I would urge you strongly to vote no on Proposition 19.
Okay, thank you, both of you. I appreciate that.
And now, before we go to the next one, I have some results to share with everybody. We have results in both races. And so before I share the screen, I want to let you know that there were 102 ballots cast in this round. And there were 2 abstentions in both races, which means that there were 100 votes cast, and the number needed to get endorsed is 55 exactly. So if you see a number, so with that in mind, I'm going to open it up, and you'll see anybody above the number 55 will be endorsed. And so for the rent control board, you can see that Anastasia got 94 votes and Carolyn got 91 votes for no endorsements. And for the Board of Education, the result is here. Jen Smith, 57, John Keene, 59, and Maria Leon Vasquez, 61. And Keith came just a little bit short at 51 votes, and Jason got 12 votes. So those are the results. That means that we have our 5 endorsements there, and we do not need to go to a second round. So we're going to continue now with the rest of the.
Can you put the numbers back up, John, please?
I will share the numbers in the chat. We're going to continue with the presentation now. Janine, go ahead.
Sure. The next proposition will be Proposition 20, and to present the no position will be Tanish Hollins from the Californians for Safety and Justice.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you for having me. My name is Tanish Hollins. I am the California State Director of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, also the Associate Director of Californians for Safety and Justice. Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice is here to ask for a no position on Proposition 20. We are a survivor network of more than 12,000 crime victims throughout the state, mostly from communities most impacted by crime and violence, and we stand in opposition to this bill for several reasons. The first thing to really note about Proposition 20 is that it is funded by special interest groups. that really want to divert tens of millions of dollars essentially every year to roll back criminal justice reform. And this is just not wise and not a smart approach to public safety at this time. What would Proposition 20 do? It would lower the felony threshold to $250, which is the lowest in the country. It would second lowest in the country. It would mandate revocations for technical violations for folks who have past convictions, deny parole considerations for anyone serving a sentence, mandate that there would be collection of DNA evidence, and along with other kind of draconian measures to public safety that would essentially swell our jails and prisons with mostly low-level offenders at a price tag of what we estimate, and this is a bipartisan estimate, nonpartisan estimate of up to $1.2 billion a year. It's been mentioned several times tonight, the state that California is in. We're all being impacted by wildfires, by COVID-19 on our communities. And, you know, our state, unfortunately, was ill prepared to deal with a lot of the crises that we've been dealing with right now. All of our public systems have been stretched and stressed. To have a proposition on the ballot that threatens to divert billions of dollars back into incarcerating low-level offenders just isn't a smart investment. It's a waste of money. In addition to the waste, it would cut rehabilitation programs for individuals who are in jail and prison, take away the incentives for them to rehabilitate before their release. It would cut money to mental health programs that are proven to reduce repeat crime, cut money to schools, healthcare, housing, homeless programs, fire protection, and crime victims. You'll see a lot of the—
Thank you. Time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to read the yes position from Assemblyman Jim Cooper. Right now, California crimes that are considered non-serious and non-violent and allow you to get out of jail or prison early are drugging and raping someone, raping a developmentally excuse me, disabled person, spousal abuse, a drive-by shooting, human trafficking of a child. So a myriad of crimes, some 17 to be exact. The public never had an idea. These were not considered serious or violent crimes in the state of California. When they hear it, they're shocked. And there'll be no rebuttal as we didn't have a no position, I mean a yes position presented.
There you go.
And the next proposition is the Proposition 21 on rent control. And I would like to introduce Susie Shannon. And Susie is a DNC member. Welcome, Susie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to present today. I'm Susie Shannon. I work with homeless and low-income communities. Proposition 21 prevents homelessness, preserves affordable housing, and provides for local control for rental assistance. Currently, we do not have local control for rental assistance, and this has caused many, many problems, including when COVID-19 hit. A lot of our municipalities passed ordinances to help COVID-impacted tenants, and a lot of them were sued because of a law called Costa-Hawkins, which prevents local government from being able to provide that kind of rental assistance. So this proposition has been thoroughly vetted within the Democratic Party community. The California Democratic Party supports it, LA County Democratic Party, SMER, Kevin McCown and Sue Himmelrich, who are your Santa Monica City Council members, State Senator Ben Allen, Assembly Member Richard Bloom, every elected rent board member in the state of California has endorsed this proposition. Congressmembers Maxine Waters, Barbara Lee, Karen Bass, Tony Vasquez, Board of Equalization just spoke, ACLU of Southern California, Pacific Palisades Dem Club, the LA Times, and on and on and on, as well as SEIU, Unite Here, and Ask Me. So we have a very large coalition, and then some senior groups like Social Security Works and CARA, and also veterans groups like Vet Voices. So currently we have 151,000 people, a little over that, who are homeless in the state of California. If you saw the Aspen Institute report, it shows that 4 to 5 million people right now are in danger of being evicted if immediate action isn't taken by the government. And 365,000 in LA alone, according to the UCLA Luskin Institute. We are in dire straits here in California. Prop 21 is one of our only things right now in terms of reversing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. And I'd like to introduce on the no position on Prop 21, Jay Johnson, who's a former president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club.
Is he here? I see him on the.
Does he need to the mute?
Yeah, there
Yes.
there he is. Hey, Jay, how's it going, man?
Fine. Can you hear me now?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey.
Good. Vote no on Proposition 21. It's bad for homeowners, renters, property owners, and bad for Santa Monica. Don't make the housing crisis worse than it is. Under this proposition, rent control can be expanded to rented homes and condos if built before 2005. High-end condos will replace existing older apartment buildings. Your building will be more likely to be Ellis. Rent control will be expanded to homes and condos when more than 2 are owned, or if title is held in a trust or an LLC. Owner-occupied triplexes will have all rents limited upon vacancy. A rented room in your home could be rent controlled subject to a $20,000 relocation cost to evict the renter. The poison pill of 21 is that existing vacancy decontrol will be ended. If a tenant moves out, the first year rent cannot be raised more than 5% for new renters. Almost 7,000 units of existing below market rents when vacated here in Santa Monica will go back to key money, no advertising, friends or relatives only, take it in as is, no improvements or repairs, or held vacant, and say goodbye to the $50,000 buyouts, plus less choice to find another place if you need to move. Limited rental income will reduce the ability to improve, repair, or earthquake retrofit. Don't limit the income if you can't limit the expenses. Reduced rental income means lower assessed values, lower property tax, and budget cuts to the city. Governor Newsom is no on 21. He and many legislators opposed Prop 10 last time. It lost 35-65. They placed a new law to limit annual rent increases to 5% plus CPI. Prop 21 will not reduce rents on existing in-place tenants, but 21 will cancel all tenant protections of last year's new law supported by tenants and landlords. Vote no on 21.
Thank you, Jay. Susie, your rebuttal?
Great, thank you. So Proposition 21 actually keeps tenants in their homes. It prevents homelessness and it saves taxpayers money. Right now we're paying $35,000 to $45,000 per person that's chronically homeless, living on the streets. We don't want to add to that. And so local government should have the control to actually provide tenant assistance. David Chu, who is the author of AB 1482, which the other side keeps using, is an endorser of Proposition 21 because he understands that there is not tenant assistance that is linked into AB 1482 like we need for COVID impacted tenants. I think that, in the end, there's a reason why so many people are endorsing this, who look at this, who are in the field and work with communities that are on the margin. And so I really hope that the Santa Monica Democratic Club will support this as they did Proposition 10. I came to you 2 years ago and asked you to support Proposition 10 and you did. It did fail at the bottom of the ballot box, but 20,000 more people have become homeless since then. Please vote yes on Proposition 21.
Well, thank you, Susie. And Jay, your rebuttal?
Homelessness can be solved with a number of other issues. Its basic core is based on substance abuse, mental problems, of which the financial aspects of rent is just one minor, relatively minor aspect of the entire problem of homelessness. This particular law will have no major impact on homelessness issues. I've supported rent control from the beginning when we moved here. I continue to support normal rent control and the rent control we've had. Extreme rent control is bad for our city and it's bad for our state. And going back to the way things were in 1995 is when we did have up to then when we had vacancy control is no answer. The San Francisco Chronicle is for no on 21, as are many, many newspapers in San Jose, Sacramento, and throughout the state in San Diego. Vote no on 21.
Thank you, Susie and Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah. So what's next, Janine?
Okay, our next proposition is Proposition 23 on kidney dialysis. And to present the no position is our, excuse me?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and to present the no position is Shai Roy, our past president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club, a Santa Monica College trustee, and recently the president of the Los Angeles Medical Association. Shai?
Hey, thanks so much for having me to speak against this proposition. And just at the end of this night, I just want to commend John and the rest of you, John, Janine, the rest of the executive committee to really put together a really nice couple of events here where we learned a lot about the different candidates for all the seats. So great job putting together this virtual event. So Prop 23 is, the major part of Prop 23 is it would require a physician to be in place at dialysis clinics. And it comes, there was a similar proposition in 2 years ago that targeted dialysis clinics again as well. And that was defeated at the ballot box, and this is sort of coming on the heels of that. There's 80,000 Californians that require dialysis. Many of them are undocumented and or on Medi-Cal. I'm a physician at Harbor UCLA. We're lucky enough to live in California where we can get undocumented patients access to dialysis. But I can tell you it's much harder to get them into a dialysis clinic than it is to get regularly insured patients into a dialysis clinic. What this will do is increase healthcare costs and potentially worsen doctor shortages that were present before COVID, and we're really at risk of it with COVID as well. There's a lot of uncertainty going forward, and this is absolutely not the time to do anything to increase costs of healthcare, as we're going to see dramatic costs to things like Medi-Cal, et cetera, going forward. So this puts patients at risk, and really what it does is puts our most vulnerable patients at risk, which are our Medi-Cal patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. And to present the is Sarah again from
patients'
our
blood is taken
legislative
out,
committee.
cleaned, and put back in their body. And it's so expensive that before Obamacare, patients couldn't get insurance for it. And that's why Congress allowed these specific renal patients to enroll in Medicare at any age. This federal program turned dialysis into a hugely profitable business, and two companies have been big beneficiaries, DaVita and Fresenius. Their clinics account for roughly 70% of the market. And incidentally, these two companies are also the only two funding the No on Prop 23 campaign. So this proposition has four main components. Number one, it requires infection reporting to state and federal governments. Patients have reported bloodstains, cockroaches, and flies in the clinics, and staff don't have time to properly sanitize the space between patients. The public has a right to know about the sanitary conditions and infections at dialysis clinics. So that's number one. The second component is that it requires clinics to get approval from the state health department before closing down, just like hospitals are currently required to do. And number three, it prohibits discrimination against patients based on their health insurance. Once Obamacare made it illegal for private insurers to reject dialysis patients, the firms began lusting for their higher reimbursements. And in fact, patients, there was a lawsuit accusing these companies for telling patients to switch from Medicare to private health insurance just so that these giants can make more money. And then number four addresses what Shai brought up, which is that it requires a doctor be on site anytime patients are being treated. Clinic workers are under pressure to rush patients through treatment, and a doctor on site is necessary if something goes wrong. One survey found far fewer nurses on the premises of for-profit companies compared with other clinics, and unlicensed technicians are the ones taking up the slack. Another report found that DaVita and Fresenius patients had higher mortality rates and hospitalization rates than those at other clinics as well. One argument by No on 23 is that clinics will have to shut down because on-site doctors are very expensive.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Shai. There'll be no rebuttal as we didn't have an outside representative on the position.
We do have a rebuttal on this. We have Shai and Sarah, right?
Oh, that's right. Okay, well, okay.
So let's go.
Just thanks, Sarah. Just to rebut a couple of the points, it will, this would threaten, I think you were going on to make a point about dialysis clinics potentially shutting down. This would absolutely threaten some dialysis clinics, particularly in urban and rural areas, to shut down. What really happens in the real world right now is, for example, when I try to discharge a patient from Harbor UCLA, all our patients are either uninsured or on Medi-Cal, is if we happen to have a patient with some sort of insurance, we are able to get, a dialysis clinic, and it's not always those two clinics. There are other dialysis clinics that we use, though we use DaVita. DaVita does a lot of Medi-Cal patients. But, we are forced to, sort of compromise, here is this doesn't just happen in dialysis, but here is a insured patient that will get good reimbursement, and then, Medi-Cal reimburses very poorly. And so that kind of thing will get even worse with this type of a law. This shouldn't be legislated. This should be legislated, not put in form of proposition.
Thank you, Shai. Sarah, do you have any comment?
Sure. I especially appreciated that last sentence that Shai just said. Completely agree. But I guess a couple of points to just bring up. The two dominant, these two, DaVita and Fresenius, they're reporting pre-tax operating profits in the billions and margins of 18 to 19%. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, dialysis is an enormously profitable business, $34 billion a year in Medicare charges alone. And then there's also another study, which I can provide these details if needed. Physician engagement was determined to be a factor differentiating facilities with lower than expected mortality from those with higher than expected mortality. So I think I'll just leave my points there. And thank you for presenting the other side, Shai.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
Thank you both so much.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the Prop 24, and it's on consumer privacy. And our first speaker will be Darka Larimer-Hall, the Vice Chair of the California Dem Party.
Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well tonight. And thanks, Janine, and good to see you, John. So for folks I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Darka Larimer-Hall. I'm talking to you from Santa Barbara, where I live, and I do have the honor of serving as one of the vice chairs of the state party. But I'm working on Prop 24, and data privacy, consumer data privacy is actually something that I've been involved with for a couple of years, and was working on the campaign when we were all set to go to the ballot on this one 2 years ago. We were able to come to a legislative compromise and pass the strongest legislation protecting our data and requiring companies that are collecting our data to get our permission before selling it. And it's the strongest protections in the country, modeled after similar protections passed and put into place about a year ago in the EU. Since that time, since it was passed in the legislature and had a year-long review period, there's been at least 8 major attempts by big tech to come in and scuttle the law and take out all of the core protections. So the same folks who wrote the original law, primarily a guy named Alistair McTaggart, who's a real estate dude from the Bay Area and happens to have a strong passion about consumer data privacy, put a bunch of his money together and has been funding this effort now for several years. But he got the sort of put the band back together, got the original authors together, and put together what became Prop 24. And since that time, there's been a couple of the General Privacy Coalition partners who've decided to oppose this ballot measure. And I'm happy to discuss those reasons why.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next speaker on the no side of Prop 24 will be Mary Ross, who is working with various activist groups in support of the no position on 24.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here tonight. My name is Mary Ross, and I'm here to ask you to oppose Prop 24. The yes side has spent a lot of money paying Democrats to shill for this flawed proposition. They are claiming that it will increase privacy protections in California. This is a lie. I know because I was a co-author and a proponent of the California Consumer Privacy Act. This was an initiative that was going to be on the 2018 ballot until Sacramento passed it through the legislature. This law just went into effect on January 1st, 2020, and the Attorney General just started enforcing it July 1st. It gives all Californians the right to find out what personal information businesses are collecting about them, their devices, and their children, the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information, the right to delete your personal information, the right to hold businesses accountable if they fail to protect your personal information and your identity is breached. The 52 pages of Prop 24 rolls back these protections by weakening definitions, undermining enforcement, and making it harder for you to exercise your rights, including the right to opt out of the sale of your personal information. Worse, it exposes undocumented immigrants to increased risk of harassment by ICE. It continues to allow digital redlining that marginalizes people of color, stigmatizes their community, and creates costly barriers to them owning homes. It sanctions pay-for-privacy schemes that force poor and working-class Californians to pay money they cannot afford to protect their privacy rights. It permits employer surveillance schemes that threaten workers' ability to organize into unions, and it furthers the ability of corporations to use unregulated facial recognition technology. This is why we call on you to join Dolores Huerta, the ACLU of California, Color of Change, CHRLA, Consumer Federation, the California Small Business Association, the California Nurses Association, the League of Women Voters, and many other individuals and organizations, as well as 16 editorial boards across the state in opposing Prop 24. Thank you.
Okay. The rebuttal, Daraka?
So I want to start my rebuttal with what I thought was a really articulate summary of all of the back and forth that's happened within the privacy community about this initiative. And it's from the endorsement statement from the Los Angeles Times. We could sink deeply into the history and behind the scenes drama, but in the end, the questions for voters are whether Prop 24 would make privacy protection stronger, whether it goes far enough to make a meaningful difference, and whether it would enable the state to provide even better protections in the future. The answer to all three is yes. And the fact is that this proposition was crafted as a way to put a benchmark down in legislation that couldn't be rolled back in Sacramento by lobbyists from big tech. I think it's a very, very smart move because it's amendable, but only in the direction of strengthening the intent of the measure, which is consumer protection. And it can be amended in that direction by Mary or any other advocates by a simple majority of the legislature. That's a smart maneuver to make sure that the burden on any enemies of consumer protection is against the majority rather than for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, your rebuttal?
Great, thanks. And I'm asking you to vote no. I want to just first say it sets a floor, but it also sets a ceiling. So it's going to be very hard to change the flaws in this law. I also want to read the independent analysis of the League of Women Voters. Quote, "We oppose due to the complexity of a 52-page initiative with impacts and nuances that are difficult for voters to discern and rollbacks to existing protections. Among the troubling aspects of Prop 24 is its expansion of pay-for-privacy. The initiative also weakens the current legal requirement that companies respect a global opt-out. These burdens are fundamentally inequitable, placing the onus on the average consumer to protect their own privacy. Please vote no on Prop 24.
Thank you. Our next proposition in the final prop would be Prop 25.
Thank God.
Sure.
Peter, come on.
Okay, is Prop 25, which is the prop on cash bail. And we will have reading the yes statement, Amy Bishop Dunbar from our legislative committee and our executive board of the Santa Monica Dem Club.
Yes vote on Proposition 25 is a vote to replace the money bail system with the use of pretrial assessment tools that focus on safety and flight risk. It is estimated that almost 46,000 Californians, a disproportionate number of whom are Black and Latinx, are being held in jail and not yet sentenced. Cash bail both criminalizes poverty and reflects the systemic racism that plagues our criminal justice legal process. California must move away from the money bail system to create a fair and more equitable criminal legal system that balances public safety with a presumption of innocence. People who pose little threat to the public safety should not be subject to losing their homes, jobs, and families simply because they lack the money to pay for release from jail while awaiting their day in court. I have this that says the pre-trial arrest assessment tools as an alternatives to money bail are controversial, as there is some evidence that these tools can be designed and used in ways that increase racial bias and inequity in the pre-trial process. However, California law was recently passed that requires pre-trial risk assessment tools to go through a validation process at least once every year. This report says the constitutional presumption of innocence is vital in pretrial detention considerations, and all instances of detention while awaiting trial must be tailored to exceptions that Constitution protect. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And to present the no position, we will again hear from Ulysses Hernandez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for this time. So Proposition 25 is like the propositions we heard around the death penalty a couple of years ago. Very confusing. The title is Replace Cash Money Bail with the Use of Risk Assessments. What it doesn't include is that not only does it cement the use of racially biased risk assessments, who experts from MIT and Harvard have confirmed are racially biased, also it expands the probation department. Probation is being tasked under SB 10 or Prop 25 to do two things: supervise people who are pre-trial and to conduct the risk assessment piece. In LA County, there's two levels of risk assessments that are being implemented under Prop 25. One is at the time of arrest and the other is at the time of before arraignment. And also Prop 25 expands judicial discretion almost to unlimited lengths, meaning that a judge has almost unlimited power to decide who can be incarcerated pre-trial or not. When we think about the cash money bail system, I am not in support of it. My loved ones have had to pay to get out. I know what that means, but I also know from working in LA County and particularly focused on pretrial reform that SB 10 would actually expand the carceral system. We know that in LA County, 44% out of the 7,000 people who are in our jails were simply there because they couldn't pay to get out. But replacing that with a system of risk assessments, more probation, and unlimited judges' power is not the way to go. In LA County, one of the biggest things that leads to reincarceration are probation violations. Now imagine adding thousands more people under the probation supervision who have not even been convicted. There's a policy, like also some legal analysis that have been done saying that if this doesn't pass, we can't end cash money bail. And that's correct in answering, will we be able to reform cash money bail through legislation? But for us, the vision is bigger than that. Your freedom should not be commodified through the bail industry, and it also shouldn't be determined by the use of racially biased risk assessments, and you shouldn't be put under probation. We have developed a platform called Preserving the Presumption of Innocence that we hope to move forward after Prop 25 fails. So we have a plan. But what I can tell you is that replacing one terrible system of cash money bail with an even worse and larger carceral system would be detrimental to all the work happening in LA County around pretrial reform and across the country. Last piece I want to add is that in the Care First Jails last report that I mentioned earlier when I talked about Measure J.
Time.
Oh, sorry about, okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And Amy, your rebuttal?
One of the things that talks about is that everybody says, oh, well, my God, we're going to have these risk assessment tools that are going to attack and further condemn those that have no money. And that is actually not the case. This particular passage and support and saying yes on this allows us to give people back their lives. It evaluates the level of risk. It actually is in a point at where it can be legislated. These risk assessment tools are reviewed yearly. So these arguments that keep pinging, we need justice, is actually starting to address these racial inequities and biases that exist in the Justice Department when people are incarcerated just because they're waiting trial. They're left in the jails just because they're awaiting trial.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Ulysses?
a couple things is that if Prop 25 passes, judges will use the risk assessment scores to lock you up pretrial indefinitely. So getting rid of cash money bail means that you have absolutely no way out. But also, experts from Harvard Law, MIT have told us, have written reports that you can't take out the bias in risk assessments. Also, one of the biggest contributing factors to having a high risk score is your age. The younger you are, the higher the risk score that you will get. And so you can't take out bias out of a system that's built by people who have biases when they're building it. Also, ask yourselves, when people say, oh, there's gonna be laws that will validate risk assessments, what does validation even mean? The bureaucracy itself has not even been able to explain it to us. Probation, who already uses some of these type of tools, it's a black box, and we have no information on what it actually means to validate. What are the factors that they're going to be used? But just to give you some more insight, some of the questions that you get asked during the risk assessment interview is, how old are you? Do you have a cell phone? Are you in a relationship? So those are the factors that determine whether you will reoffend. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, I want to, that's the end of our ballot measures. And again, thank you so much for all the ballot measure speakers who waited very patiently to present their case. And thank you very, very much.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And you should be getting the vote should be coming in 2 minutes. Should be coming in at 9:15, and it's going to be open until 9:30. So take a look at your inbox as we continue. Within about 1 minute, you'll be receiving that ballot. So thank you to all of our presenters for all the ballot measures. I know that all of our members really appreciate both hearing from the yes and the no, whether it's the side that the Democratic Party supports or not, whether it's the side that our club ultimately endorses or not. Everyone's really glad to hear all these different points of view.